Welcome back to the What You Need to H2Know podcast, where we feature the people, places, and projects shaping Ontario's water community. I'm Michele Grenier, the Executive Director of the Ontario Waterworks Association, and today we're bringing you a slightly different format for this episode. Instead of a member feature, today's conversation is about advocacy, why it matters, how it works, and how OWWA is strengthening its approach to government relations to better serve members and the broader drinking water sector. I'm joined by three people who've been central to this work. Deborah Goudreau, Manager of Plant Operations for the City of Hamilton. Deb is one of our OWWA board members and also sits on the AWWA Board of Directors representing the Ontario section. Christina Marciano, Vice President, Environmental Practice Group Lead, and Faria Amin, Associate Environment, both from Sussex Strategy Group. Thank you all for being here today. Before we dive in, I know it's a snow day in much of central and southwestern Ontario today, so I just wanted to check in. Are you all staying safe and warm, and where are you calling in from? Maybe we'll throw it over to you first, Deb.
Sure. Yes, I am. I'm safe and sound. I'm actually joining this call from my office at 700 Woodward, the location of the City of Hamilton's drinking water plant and wastewater treatment plant.
Also managed to stay warm and dry today. Not so much yesterday with all the shoveling, but we made it through. I'm in Toronto and I'm currently working from home today because I did not want to venture downtown with all this snow.
I'm also working from home today. I'm in downtown Toronto, happily safe from the snow and very grateful to live in a condo where I don't have to worry about shoveling.
That is one of the advantages. So first off, ladies, I'd like to talk a little bit about Sussex Strategy Group and your work with OWWA. And so Christina, let's start with you. For our listeners who may not be familiar, can you tell us a bit about Sussex and in your role, who you are, what you do, and the types of clients you work with?
Yeah, for sure. Happy to. So Sussex Strategy Group, we're a government relations and strategic communications and campaigns firm. So we're headquartered here in Toronto. We also have an office in Ottawa, and we have team members in Quebec and in Atlantic Canada. And we also work with a network of affiliates supporting our work out in the Western provinces. And so on the government relations side of the business, we work at all three levels of government. So we engage with municipal governments, provincial governments, and federal governments on behalf of clients. And we work with organizations of all shapes and sizes who are impacted by or interested in government, whether it's legislation, regulation, policy, or program development. And we support organizations with their advocacy and their communications to government. Something else that makes Sussex a little bit unique is that we also have sectoral expertise and experience. So we work heavily in the energy and environment space, infrastructure, healthcare, over the last year, especially more so in trade and tariffs. I feel like everybody's sort of become an expert in trade and tariffs. But yeah, so working with organizations big and small to help them with their advocacy and communications needs when speaking to government. And then on the communication side of the business, it's all the traditional communications work. So whether that's public relations, media relations, crisis comms, corporate communications, and then our campaigns and digital team are more focused on digital advocacy as well as creative services. So branding, website design, so on and so forth. So we were founded in 1998. And yeah, that's a little bit about Sussex.
Oh, wow. That's even broader than I knew about. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
So Christina, you've worked in government relations for quite some time. Can you tell us a bit about what drew you into the field and what keeps you interested in this kind of work?
For sure. So I just celebrated my 14th anniversary, not just in the field, but with Sussex as well. I've been with the organization for the last 14 years. My career path or how I found myself doing this type of work is a bit it's not as typical. So usually we see a lot of people who enter this line of work, they've spent a period of time working in government or in politics in some way, shape, or form. And then once they decide to leave that role, they move into government relations and to the consulting side of things. I didn't do that. I am born and raised Sussex and GR. So no, I graduated. I did my undergrad and my master's in political studies. I always had an interest in policy development, in politics and government. I knew that I wanted to get involved in that field in some way, shape, or form. And so I was fortunate enough to be introduced to Paul Pellegrini, who's the founder of Sussex, over 25 years ago, and had one of those kind of meet and greet coffee chats you do when you're looking to break into a field, or you're job searching and you're young and you're fresh out of school. And that conversation with Paul evolved into a job interview. They actually had an opening as an entry-level position as administrative assistant. And so I applied and got the job and took that opportunity to join the firm and really learn more about what government relations is and the impact that it has, and have worked my way through and up in the company over those last 14 years. I think fundamentally what always keeps me interested in this field of work is just being able to work alongside governments to help impact policy decisions, and seeing sort of the real world implications of that. It's really interesting and exciting. You meet a lot of interesting people, and so it's never a dull day doing government relations.
Yeah. Well, that's really interesting tale of, just getting your foot in the door, right?
Mm-hmm.
Have your 14 years at Sussex all been with this environmental focus, or is that a more recent development?
It hasn't been the whole time, but I'd say the majority of time it's been the focus. So, I moved into, after I was the admin assistant, I moved into a research role, and that gave me more exposure to various parts of the organization. And so I was a bit of a resource to all the teams. And during that time as well, our energy and environment practice was growing and expanding pretty rapidly. So they needed a lot more support. So I found myself contributing more to that team and to the clients that we work with in that space. And it was through that exposure that I really found sort of the interest and the passion for those issues, and really started to focus my attention on that. So I'd say I've been working in the environment energy space probably for the better part of the last decade. And then I assumed leadership of the environment practice in 2023, I believe. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Wow. That's great. That's a really interesting journey. Faria, let's hear from you now. And can you tell us what led you into government relations? And if you have a similar story to Christina, if your path is a little different, and what does your role at Sussex look like on a day-to-day basis?
Sure, thanks, Michelle. So I've been working in government relations for about 4.5 years, and 2.5 of those years have been with Sussex. Like Christina, I also stuck my way into government relations without having any experience working on the political side of things. So I got my start. I was interning in government relations at another firm during my last year of grad school. And once I finished my program, I started working full time, and then eventually made my way over to Sussex and have stuck with GR ever since. I got into government relations because I've always been very drawn to policy, public service, and that space where the strategy becomes real world action. I realized early on that I love working at that intersection of complex issues and public decision making. And so I thought GR felt like a natural fit, because I find that in my role, it's all about translating those issues into something that government can actually use. At Sussex, my day-to-day can look very different. Lots of responsibilities, and each day there's something new going on, but I find it's a mix of helping clients navigate government processes, tracking policy and legislative developments, helping shape their advocacy strategies, pulling together materials like key messages or briefing notes. And most importantly is that relationship building aspect. So making sure that government is being engaged by our clients in a constructive and informed way.
Thanks for that. I think I had a question lined up for you about what surprised you most about this type of work, but I'm gonna spin it a little bit and say, because you do work on a lot of the materials that we're preparing for OWWA, is there anything about the water sector specifically that surprised you since you've started working with us?
I think one of the biggest surprises has been just how interconnected your issues are with government. I think at first when we onboarded, my mind went to this will mostly be work that the Ministry of Environment oversees, but I've learned that it really does touch on so many other ministries like labor, health, infrastructure, and so on. So it's been very interesting seeing how much more complex the issues can be. And I've seen this across a lot of my clients as well in different sectors. So it's never as much of a clean fit or as obvious what ministries you impact at first, but it's been very fascinating seeing how across ministries and across government the organization's issues touch.
Okay. Oh, that's great.
Mhm.
Thanks for that. So Deb, turning to you and maybe the internal OWWA perspective and why advocacy matters for us as an association. Advocacy and policy development has become, has had a really strong focus in our current strat plan. And I'd say, sorry, I should say strategic plan, so not to throw around too much lingo. And it's a bit of an inside joke that Deb is our strategic plan guru because unfortunately she's had to help develop and deliver probably the last 3 plans.
Yeah.
And so she's known for her strat plan presentation. But a lot of the foundation for the work we're doing now was laid back in 2019, 2020, when we sort of started reinventing the association. Can you give our listeners a bit more context and talk about why the board felt it was important to shift the focus onto some of these issues?
That's great. Thanks, Michele. The advocacy piece is one of the pieces that I'm really most proud of in my almost 10 years now serving on the board. And really, it was sort of a natural evolution of the board as the staff and the board was maturing, that we really felt that we're at a place where we had the ability to offer a lot more guidance to our regulators and really help with that. And I love that Faria mentioned the intersection of where strategy sort of hits the real world and so really helping our regulators to understand some of the challenges that the industry does face and how some of the legislation that exists can be utilized to better meet both the province or federal goals and objectives, as well as actually improving the lives of Canadians.
Yeah, I think that's a great summary. And I agree that this work is really at the heart of why we exist as an association.
Yes.
And so I guess with your City of Hamilton hat on and with Hamilton being one of our largest utility members, can you talk a bit from that perspective of what does effective advocacy actually mean? And how does this work add value for utilities or operators and some of our private sector partners across the province?
Yeah, well, certainly, in addition to my current role, I've been in the utility sector for quite a period of time now, and the industry it's large and it's diverse, but there's a pretty consistent theme throughout the industry in terms of the legislation that impacts us, and that the realities of providing safe, secure, and sustainable drinking water to the residents of Ontario. So, I think that effective advocacy is really about helping those in government, politicians who are developing policies and the strategy side of it, understanding what that actually looks like as you start implementing it in real world examples. What building more houses actually, what is entailed in that, in the specifics and the details, and I think we can all get behind those goals and those visions. It's about how our members can help guide policy to realize those goals and those objectives in a efficient manner.
Yeah, I think OWWA has always been very good at like that boots on the ground perspective.
Yeah.
And I see this latest round of activities as being a little bit more forward looking, right? Helping the province to kind of avoid unintended consequences of some of the policy decisions that
Yeah.
are being made. So on that note, Christina, I'll come back to you. So we knew, OWWA had some thoughts and ideas of what we thought the perception about OWWA was within the province or on the political side. But when we reached out to you initially, we agreed that the best first step was going to be an advocacy audit.
Mhm.
Can you tell our listeners a bit about why that's an important place to start rather than, us taking our wish list and going straight to the premier and saying, go do all these things?
For sure. I think the audits are always a great place to start, particularly if the organization doesn't have like a more mature or developed advocacy or government relations function, because it really provides a good baseline for understanding where you are, which then helps you be able to map out more strategically not only where you want to go, but how you want to get there. And so it provides some insight and perspective about maybe already what you're doing and what you're doing well, what needs some improvement, where the gaps exist. And so we can use that information as a baseline to help strategize and inform what that approach to effective government relations is going to be. I think it's also helpful to start there because as you're creating that baseline of awareness or understanding of perception and function, when you do move forward with implementing a more thoughtful or strategic government relations approach, down the line, you can do another audit, and then it's a way to measure that progress. And so you're asking Deb about kind of effectiveness and how you see effective government relations. This is another way to sometimes it's hard to measure what that success looks like. We work with clients who hire us for very specific projects, right? A regulation needs to be amended or updated for a certain reason. Maybe a new technology exists that didn't exist when the regulation was first introduced. And so, there's a very specific objective there, but we also work with organizations, particularly trade associations, where it's often broader. The objectives are broader. It's about relationship development. It's about influence. It's about creating credibility, being seen as a resource, a thought leader, so on and so forth. And so sometimes it's hard to measure how you measure success of those efforts. And so having this audit that we've done now, it sort of gives us somewhere to work from, where we can down the line reflect on and see and measure the progress in which we've made in your efforts.
Yeah, I think it gives us a good baseline, right?
Yeah.
Yep. Faria, can you walk us through what that the audit process actually looked like? I know there was a big long list of individuals that you did reach out to, but can you tell us a bit more about who was consulted and what kinds of things you were assessing?
Sure. So as a whole, the audit had three broad components or steps to it. There was an onboarding phase, then the engagement phase, and then finally the reporting and recommendations phase. So first, during the onboarding phase, we met with the organization and we learned about OWWA. So we had a kickoff session to understand who OWWA is, what the key issues are for the organizations and its members, and what the GR work had looked like so far. So what parts of governments OWWA had engaged with, how often, and in what ways. Using that information, we identified which parts of government were most connected to OWWA's mandate. So next, we had the engagement phase where we met with relevant parts of government to understand their general awareness and perceptions of the organization. So following the onboarding exercise, we created a survey and interview guide and engaged anonymously with parts of government to understand what their awareness of OWWA was, their understanding of the association's members and issues, how they perceived OWWA as a stakeholder and partner, and what their interactions had been like so far. We made sure to note to participants that all of the observations were aggregated, so there were no identifying details about any individual or office that we met with. And we made sure to highlight this because we found that protecting their confidentiality was important both to get honest insights from them and also to maintain trust with them. And from our surveys, what we found was that the feedback ranged from some areas of government being less familiar with OWWA to other parts describing OWWA as a credible and trusted partner. So following the surveys, we had our last step, which was the reporting and recommendations phase. So here we pulled everything together, presenting the findings of our engagement with government in both a deck and a written report. And in these materials, we included suggested next steps on how OWWA could enhance their government advocacy going forward to address any of those gaps we identified from the surveys.
Great, thanks. I guess building on that, Christina, without taking us all the way into the weeds, can you share what were some of the key findings or themes that emerged from the audit?
Yeah, I think the key findings were pretty straightforward. I think some of the findings were not a surprise to the organization. At a top line, some of the feedback we heard was where the organization was already engaging with government, you were doing it effectively. So as Faria mentioned, you were, viewed as credible, trustworthy. There was a sense that the information that you were providing and the knowledge sharing that the organization does with government was useful and helpful. But on the whole, that was only sort of like one part of government. And so the other key takeaway, which again, I don't think was surprising to the organization, was that there was not a lot of familiarity with OWWA across the broader government, the broader provincial government. And as Faria mentioned, there's a lot more ministries that where your issues touch on than we had maybe initially assumed. And so speaking across some of those broader parts of government, it became clear that the organization wasn't, government wasn't overly familiar with it. But the other kind of key observation or finding was that there was a lot of opportunity there to be proactive and to take a more intentional approach, and that there was also openness from those parts of government where there was less familiarity with the organization. There was an explicit openness and interest in learning more and further engaging. So I think, the takeaways from that was that you really have a big opportunity to kind of it's nice to start from scratch sometimes because you can really be thoughtful and intentional about how you approach. And so there's broad opportunity to do so.
Yeah, thanks for summarizing that. Deb, can you share a bit of the board's perspective when, in those initial thoughts on receiving that report and what may have stood out to you in particular? And then, we've talked about things that we expected to hear, but things that were maybe a little bit more surprising. Can you kind of touch on some of those issues?
Sure. I think in general, Christina's right. Largely this was a confirmation of what we knew. We know, for example, that we have very strong positive working relationships with sort of a senior staff level at the Ministry of Environment in particular. However, some of the other ministries like municipal affairs and housing, infrastructure were not as well known, and largely the political sector or sphere of the government really is largely unaware of the association, and so this really wasn't that much of a surprise because we haven't made it a focus. Certainly, back around the Walkerton inquiry, there may have been more awareness and knowledge at that time amongst the politicians, particularly in the environmental space of the association, as we were working with Justice O'Connor throughout the Walkerton inquiry. But since then, which when you don't have a massive crisis going on, that's great. But then it tends to revert back to normal everyday business. So, and it was really one of the things that we wanted to get out of this government affairs audit and direction is how do we actually start effectively engaging that political leadership to try and provide them with some guidance and direction from our members.
Yeah, Deb, I think that's a great point as well in terms of our previous involvement with the province on the Walkerton inquiry. And I think the association did a great job of not wasting a good crisis. But I think we'd like to get that level of engagement without a crisis, as you said. So Faria, coming back to you, after we completed the audit, the board and staff were able to take back your advice and work with both yourself and Christina on building out what is going to be or what is now the OWWA Government Relations Roadmap. Can you tell us a bit more about some of the goals we've established for 2026 and beyond, and what are some of those key next steps that we are collectively focused on right now?
Sure. So with the roadmap, we really got an understanding of what the narrative or the story we want to tell government about OWWA is, establish those high-level priorities for our advocacy. So establishing OWWA's profile, becoming an educational resource to government, and being established as someone that eventually government will come to proactively and first for your input on issues that are relevant to the organization. So then we also determined some actionable next steps and kind of sequenced it out to understand where to go to from there. So the roadmap exercise really helped identify what OWWA's priorities were, what issues matter the most, where to focus time and effort, and who within government is important to reach. So with the roadmap now, we have a very clear starting point for the first few months. And right now, the focus is really putting those foundational pieces in place. So some of those biggest priorities that we're working through right now are clarifying the advocacy priorities so that everyone in the organization can speak with one voice and we can ensure consistent messaging to government. And then for that is the building the consistent messaging and developing clear messages that are for our priority issues, but that can be slightly tailored and tweaked to the different audiences that we meet with. And then once those background pieces are developed, the next step is beginning that outreach and engagement. So identifying who the key decision makers are that are relevant to OWWA's priority issues and sequencing our meetings strategically so that we can establish OWWA and raise its profile with government before we start launching into the heavier advocacy. So this first initial early phase is really about setting a strong foundation to make sure that any future engagement is coordinated and strategic and impactful.
Yeah, we want to make sure, if, the obvious feedback to us from the audit was lack of familiarity with the organization. So, step one is a bit of an education and profile building initiative. Michele, you said earlier, like, you can't just go and like put a laundry list of asks and issues in front of the premier and say, here you go, right? There's like a lot of work that goes into building up the awareness and then credibility of a stakeholder. And we want to be thoughtful and strategic in how we approach that. So as Faria said, that the organization is starting from a solid foundation. So it takes a bit of time, but it's very possible, and it's very worthwhile, the effort, to make sure that those who you're engaging with know who they're engaging with first and foremost. And you sort of build that dialogue so that you can actually start talking about issues and perspectives that matter to the organization and to your membership.
Yeah, I think thanks for jumping in there. I think this the key messages and the brand, right, is being developed by a subset of like very key volunteers, again, with representation from the different member groups that we represent. But I think one of the things that's allowed us to realize as well is that we need a lot more support from our members in moving this forward and being able to capture all of the different perspectives and share the messaging. And so we do have an advocacy steering committee working with us to help deliver this work. But if any of our listeners right now are interested in helping support this or advance this work, I'd encourage you to reach out to us and let us know of your interest in joining the advocacy steering committee, because it is going to take quite a lot of people rowing in the same direction to move some of these issues forward. And so, Deborah, I'm going to ask you to build a bit on what Faria and Christina have just shared there, in that we understand where we are now, and we have a map that's pointing us where we want to go. How are we going to know when we've arrived? And so, as we look into 2026, and again, I keep saying 2026 and beyond, because this isn't going to be a one and done kind of process. But what does success look like from the board's point of view?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and it's not necessarily an easy one to answer at this point in time, because I think, as both Faria and Christina mentioned, that this is right. What's going on right now is very foundational work and consolidation and really letting government and the politicians, letting them know we exist and what we're about and what the association stands for, and the voices, the people, and the members that we represent. And I think aspirationally, what success looks like, when I think about it personally, it's and I think it was Faria again who mentioned this, is really when we have gotten to the point that when an issue comes up related to water, that the deputy minister says, "Oh, I know who I can reach out to get an unbiased, professional position on this issue and potential steps to move it forward." And I think that's where we want to end up. It's gonna take a while, definitely, for us to get there, but we're moving in the right direction. So I think there'll be a lot of interim little goalposts that'll have to be set up along the way, and that's what the board's going to use to determine whether or not we're actually meeting our aim in terms of advocacy and outreach. But we do a number of things already, and we do it really well. So we submit white papers to the province and publish them as well to all of our members. We comment on draft pieces of legislation, providing commentary and recommendations, and we really do push out that opinion on various technical issues to help bridge that gap for those really coming at this strategy and the policy side of things without that technical background.
Yeah, and I think our biggest challenge is going to be building on expanding our reach, to outside of what's considered, we're not just talking about water quality parameters. We have to look at the governance structures of water utilities and the funding of water utilities and what that's going to look like in this next sort of generation of water policy. And so that's the bulk of the questions I had for each of you. But before we wrap up, I do want to continue to build on sort of this longer term vision that we've been talking about. But we'll start with you, Deb. What's one thing you wish more people in the water sector understood about advocacy or government relations?
Oh, yeah, I think it's really why it matters, right? We all have, our personal opinions, or, here's my utility hat, or here's my service provider hat. And this is what I think would be good. But it's really understanding how, getting out of our own little silos to see how the bigger pieces all fit together so that we have a consistent, strong voice with which to approach government. And I think that's really what the Advocacy Steering Committee has really been focusing on.
Christina?
Yeah. I think talking to government and representing the perspectives and interests of your sector is extremely important. The two sides need to be talking to one another. One thing I wish more people knew or understood, and we've talked about it here today, is to do government relations effectively, it's really about consistency, and it's also about credibility. And so, successful government relations is never an overnight process. It takes time and energy and effort, and it's important to be able to invest in those efforts if you're looking to see real meaningful outcomes. Government, they have a big job, they have a big responsibility. They're meeting with stakeholders and interest groups constantly, hundreds all the time. And so making sure that your perspectives are resonating and getting through, and that you are seen as that trusted and credible stakeholder, does require the consistency and effort to do so. And then again, on the flip side, it's also about credibility. Again, these people are very busy. They have a lot to accomplish, and their time is very valuable. And so you want to make sure that when you're engaging with government, that it's not just, an exercise for your organization to be able to tick a box, or in order to get the airtime or the face time that you want to have. You want to make sure that you're bringing expertise and insights and value to that meeting, so that those who you're meeting with in government also find that to be valuable and effective. And, you leave those meetings and those engagements with both sides feeling that it was well worth their time, and with an intent to continue engaging in the future. So yeah, I'd say consistency and credibility are extremely important to effective government relations.
Yeah, thanks for that. And last but not least.
So building off of Christina's point on credibility, I think one thing that I wish more people knew about government relations and advocacy is that effective advocacy isn't just bringing problems forward to government, it's also bringing solutions forward. So it's not the government's responsibility to figure out the solutions to all the problems that stakeholders present them. And they do appreciate insights from the subject matter experts, like organizations such as OWWA. So government responds the best when you can help them understand what the challenge is, why it matters, and also what a feasible and workable solution could look like. And this is important because approaching government with both the issue as well as the solution can set a collaborative tone and really position you as that credible partner rather than just a stakeholder that is presenting concerns. So in a sector that's as complex and technical as water, this kind of solution-focused approach is really powerful. And advocacy is, at the end of the day, is that it's as much about understanding government as it is about helping government understand you.
I think that's a really good
Well
way to
said.
wrap this
Yeah.
up. Yeah. And it's funny because when I talk to people who aren't in the industry and I try and explain like, oh, I work for a not-for-profit, like a trade association, this, that, and they don't understand most of my day-to-day. But when I say, oh, well, I work with the province to try and improve water quality standards or, solve issues for our members, that they can relate to.
Mhm.
So I think if we could do a better job of communicating with our members how much effort and resources we're putting into this, I think it will be, of huge benefit to the organization. So on that note, I want to say thank you to all three of you, Deb, Christina, and Faria, for the work you're doing and for taking the time to share this with our listeners. I really enjoyed our conversation today. And to our members, this is just the beginning of a more intentional and transparent approach to advocacy at OWWA, and we're looking forward to continuing the conversation. As always, you can find more information about OWWA's advocacy and policy positions on the technical resources page on our website at owwa.ca. And thanks for listening to this episode of What You Need to H2Know. Until next time.